Welcome back, Nature and Code. We're in chapter 4, and we're now trying to implement this picture here that you see. So this three-dimensional array where the first dimension is simply an array of bases, A, G, C, or T. And so one of those arrays will correspond to a DNA strand. The second dimension is the population, so we will have many of those DNA strands. And then finally, the third dimension will be time. So to implement this, let's go over to our code and start here from scratch. So I'm going to create a new document here. So I'm just going to follow the template that I've used before. So first, I'm going to say that this is an HTML document. All right. HTML tag and my head tag, and we're not going to do anything visual here, so in this particular case it won't matter whether you'll have your code in the head tag or in the body tag. I'm just going to do it in the body this time. So I'm going to have a script tag here, script and /script. All right, so now I can start coding. Okay, so how does one start? How does one, write JavaScript code from scratch when all you have is an idea in your head? So you've seen, how you can do this, how we can do this with the previous examples. But it's still something that a lot of beginners generally struggle with. You have this blank document here staring at you. How do you begin? I've often found that there are two ways to begin that are most effective for me. One is to just start with a function. Basically just say, well, you know what, eventually this whole program is going to begin by me calling a function. And then this function will start doing things, and it will call other functions, and so the whole sort of function tree will unfold. That's generally a very good approach. The other would be to just write everything out on a piece of paper. That works as well, or to sort of think about what sort of global variables do you need to get things started. Both, I think, are perfectly acceptable solutions and approaches. You really need to figure out what works for you. What I'm going to do here is I'm just going to start with a function that I'm going to define, and I'm essentially going to start from there. So what I want to do is I want to generate the first generation here. So I'm just going to call a function generate first generation. Of course, this function doesn't exist yet. But it will. So this is the first line here that my code will see and will execute. Now, of course, if I ran this, it would just say, hey, I don't know anything about a function called generate first generation. So I'll have to define that, obviously. So defining it up here, okay, generate first, generation. All right, so this has an empty body. It doesn't do anything yet. So what should this function do? Well, let's see. So we would like to generate the first generation. What does that mean? Well, it means we first need to generate the original sequence, right? Okay, that's interesting. So you know what? Let's generate a function for that as well. So I am going to call this generate first sequence. All right, and again, I don't have this function defined yet, so I'll go ahead and do that here. Function generate first sequence. And again, this at the moment is an empty function. And then after I have generated the sequence, what I need to do is I will need to push it into into the array that holds all the sequences. Just to go back here to this slide. So first I want to generate this sequence here, or any sequence, and then I would like to essentially copy the sequence and push it into this population array here. Okay, so now that I've figured out what I want to do, this already tells me a couple of things. So first, what I will need to have is I will need to have some variable that corresponds to an array that is essentially my population. I'm going to call this sequences. Okay, so this is my population. I could just add a comment here. That's the population. You know what? Let me save this so I get the syntax highlighting here. All right. So what I need here is a new folder, because we're now in chapter 4, and I would like to call this document. Well, let me call it sequences. Okay. All right, and here we have the syntax highlighting. All right, so what I just said is I would, whatever the first generate first sequence method here creates, I would like to then push that into the sequences array. This is my population. And that, of course, immediately reminds me that I should probably have another variable which essentially defines how many sequences I want to have in this population. What is the size of this population? So I'm going to call this number of sequences, and let's say 100. You can use any number that you want. The other thing that I just noticed as I said this is, well, okay, I'm going to generate the first sequence here in this method, but then how do I access it later? Well, we could just store it in a variable, because this is also an array, as we said. So I'm just going to set up this array that I'm going to call original sequence. And how long is that sequence going to be? Well, here's, that brings me to another variable that we should probably define. Let's call it sequence length. And let's say in the beginning, we'll have 20 bases. All right. So let's get to work. So let's generate this first sequence here. So this is this method here that doesn't do anything at the moment. So what I would like it to do is I would like it to generate these random base pairs, 20 of them. So I'm going to do this with a loop for var I equals 0. And then I'm going to do this, however many base pairs or however many bases I want. So this is defined in sequences length that we just defined. And then increase I by 1, so it's that we don't have an infinite loop. Okay, so I need to push something here into this array of my original sequence. Okay, what do I want to push here into this original sequence? Well, keep in mind, the sequence is an array of characters, and 1 out of 4 specific characters, A, G, C, and T. Okay, so I have to come up with some methodology here that allows me to generate a random sequence, a random character out of the 4 options. So that sounds like it should probably be its own function. So I'm just going to call this function random base. And again, as always, I actually haven't defined this yet. I need to do this, but in my thinking, I'm envisioning that I'm going to implement this method and it will return a random base, one of the 4 characters A, G, C, and T. And once I've done that, this function here will be complete. So you know what, let's go ahead and do this right away since we're at it. So function random base. So what should this function do? Well, again, it should return a random choice of these 4 bases. And so the 4 bases are bases. So I'm going to set up an array here. So they're going to be A, G, C, and T. Okay. Well, the order doesn't matter. And so again, with characters or strings, which is the same thing. I mean, a string is just multiple characters, but JavaScript doesn't distinguish between those. You can use double or single quotes. So you can do this or this, as you please. The only requirement is that, you know, if you open with a single quote, you need to close with a single quote. All right. So I would like to return a random element now of this array here. So how could I do this? Well, random, right? We know a thing or two about randomness now, and we know that JavaScript really only provides one randomness method out of the box, and that's mathRandom, and that returns a value between 0 and 1. So what we want though is we want an integer value between 0 and 4, not including 4. So either 0, 1, 2, or 3. So how could we do this? Well, the way to do this is quite simple. You're going to call mathRandom, okay, but then you're going to multiply it by 4. So now you get some number between 0 and 4. And this will actually not include 4 because mathRandom doesn't include 1 at the top either. So you essentially now get a value between 0 and 3.999999999 and so on. Again, now you get floating point numbers. That's not what you want, right? What you want is you just want the integer part of that. And that's very easy to get. There's this other handy method that math provides, and it's called floor. Okay, and it just rounds any number down to the integer. And so this is exactly what you want. Now this index will be either 0, 1, 2, 3, or 4. And so what we're going to return here is basis index, so the indexed element of this basis array. Okay, so this is looking good so far. Let's see what we're missing. We have generated the first sequence here, and that's looking good up here. We call the method. Here it's generated. It's a random base that we get from this method is pushed into the original sequence. All right, so all that's left to do now is to actually push this sequence that I just generated into my sequences array, into the population. And that's actually fairly easy to do. So again, we're going to do this with a for loop. So here I'm going to do this as many times as I've defined up there, number of sequences. And again, increase I in order to avoid infinite loops. Okay, and so I'm going to push this sequences into sequences. Okay, so what am I going to push here into my population array? Well, I want to push the original sequence, right? But I need to be careful here. I really want copies, right? I want copies of this this array. Otherwise, I'll just have the same array in the sequences array, and I don't want that. And so an easy solution for that is slice. So slice is a handy method that's provided with the array object, and it is really quite handy in the sense that you can say, give me, a slice of this particular array here and store it in this new array here over here. And if you don't have any parameters in slice, then it just takes the entire array. And that's exactly what we want. So this slice will just create a copy of this array, return it, and then we're going to push it into sequences. So that's pretty straightforward at the moment. So it looks like we have everything. So if we would save this and now go over to the browser, we would have to open the document, of course, first. File, open file, chapter 4, sequences. All right, we're not seeing anything. That's, of course, as expected. Let's take a look at the JavaScript console. All right, sequences length is not defined. Let's go back and see where we have an issue here. Sequences length, sequence length. So I made a typo here. This shouldn't be sequences length. This should only be sequence length. All right, I'm going to fix that, save it, go back to the browser, reload, and now no more errors. It doesn't exactly show what's happening here because we're not printing anything into the console, but it seems to be working. I'm not getting any errors. So in the next video, we'll expand on that code, first show what's actually being generated here, and then implement the change of the DNA sequences over time. See you in the next video.